Hey everybody, my name's Brandon. So glad to have you as a part of this Connect group. I look forward to meeting all of you and getting to know each and every one of you. I'm so glad that you have committed to take this journey through these next 10 weeks as a part of this Connect group. I'm looking forward to having some fun and getting to spend some time with each of you. So I'm gonna jump in a few things, a little bit of an introduction to this group before we really get started with this first lesson. This group is probably gonna look a little bit differently than some of the other groups that are going on this semester. We're not gonna base this group around a single activity. Instead, we're gonna bring in a whole bunch of different activities that we're gonna do week to week. And then we're also going to have these video lessons as well. My plan is to send a video link out to each of you guys on Church Center a couple of days before our planned activity. We're going to plan activities from week to week to try to get as many guys. We still want to go play and do all these activities, but we're just not going to base it around one activity throughout the 10 weeks. Like I said, we're going to have these video classes. We are going to go through and watch them before our activity. These videos are going to be between 15 and 20 minutes long, and they're going to be about the length of a short podcast. The goal here ultimately with this group is just to become better friends with other men in the church. I want to provide some teaching, some ways that you might be able to do that and have become a better friend with some guys, but also provide the opportunity for you to become a better friend. So it's not some Barney mess that's I love you, you love me, and I do love you, and I hope you love me, but that's not the way we're going to really approach it. But we're still going to have to be vulnerable and share some things with each other. We go through a lot of hard things in life, and being able to share that with our brothers, with those that are walking alongside us in this spiritual journey, in this life journey, that's important. And that's something that we want to foster and we want to build on. Some of those things, one question, even before we get started, is when's the last time you actually honestly asked someone to pray for you? When's the last time that you were going through a difficult situation, a difficult time, and you were able to ask somebody to pray for you? I'm awful at that. I've been trying to work on it, and it's not going great. It's really hard to do. It's really hard to open up. But we are going to be talking about our emotions. We're all going to be talking about the things that we experience as men that are a part of us, that are a part of our makeup and are who we are. We have emotions. We don't just, a lot of times, just don't know how to express them or how to put them into words, the things that we're feeling. We don't know how to talk about them. So our greatest example is Jesus Christ. We look back to him for so many things throughout how we're supposed to live, how we want to live, and we're going to look to him through these video lessons. Hebrews 4:15 says, "We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses." So our emotions aren't our weaknesses, but we can take this verse and bring it to mean that Jesus felt a lot of the things that we felt. He's able to sympathize with us. He's able to sympathize with our flesh. He experienced these things of the flesh and these things that we were designed with. So we're going to explore some of these ideas around emotion, around different things in these coming weeks. This lesson, we're going to talk about trustworthiness and faithfulness and how we can live that out in our lives today, because none of our relationships as men, none of our friendships with one another are really meaningful or effective if we don't show ourselves as worthy of the trust of others. So we're going to look at two stories. We're going to look at a story of Paul and his friends from 1 Thessalonians, and then we're going to look at a story that Jesus actually taught to his followers from the Gospel of Matthew. So we're going to start in 1 Thessalonians. And chapter 2, verse 8 says, "So being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also of our own selves, because you had become dear to us." In this verse, Paul says that people of the church at Thessalonica had become very dear to them, to himself and to his missionary companions. Paul cared for these people. He cared for them and for their well-being. His comment about giving of himself could mean several different things, really. It could mean that he was giving of his abilities physically, and that he was also giving of his mental capacity. You could even say that whenever he sat down to write these letters, that he was giving of himself to these friends of his. I mean, when was the last time that you sat down and tried to write a letter? Some of us may never have, but to sit down with a piece of pen and paper and to write out our thoughts and to craft the right words and not have a backspace button to just undo whenever we didn't like what we wrote, but didn't have to start all over if we messed up. Like writing a letter, yes, it was the only way of communicating back then, but it's still a hard thing. So it's giving of time and attention to those people in Thessalonica. He was giving instruction to them. He was instructing them of the way to continue living in their Christian life. In becoming friends with them during his time in Thessalonica, he became desirous to give a part of himself to them, to give different things. He gave of labor. He gave of money. He gave of encouragement, and he gave instruction. He gave physical parts of himself, he gave mental parts of himself, and he gave emotional parts of himself. All these things came together, and he wanted to give them to his friends. He wanted to give something that was meaningful to them. So we're going to jump to our second story, and we're going to talk a little bit about this story that Jesus told to a group of his followers. So Jesus would tell parables as he was teaching as a way of getting a point across. A parable is just a story that has a meaning to it. It's used as a teaching device. We would think of a metaphor or some illustration that a pastor may use as a parable. So this particular parable is known as Jesus' parable of the talents. In Matthew 25 and 21, this main verse that we want to focus on says, "His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.'" So in this story, Jesus tells of a master that was going away on a long journey. This means he was going away for a good while. This wasn't just an overnight trip. He was going away for several years, could be 5, 10, 15 years. The Bible doesn't actually say how long, and I don't think that was necessarily important to Jesus' point, but he was going away for a long time. He was going to be gone for a long time. So he calls servants to him. He calls, in this story, 3 servants. He calls servants that had already shown their ability to take his belongings, to take things that were entrusted to them and to deal well with them. The scripture says that the master gave to each servant according to his ability. So we know that they were able servants. They were not just the lowest servant that was brought in or the new servant that had just come on board. These were servants that had an ability and had already proven themselves. The story then goes on to say that the master gives each of these servants a sum of money or of property that to take care of while he's gone. So a talent, we a lot of times will take this to mean like our abilities, the things that we've been given or we're good at or that we might excel at. But the talents that's talking about here is not necessarily those abilities. But if you look at this as money or property, a talent in Jesus' time was worth about 6,000 days' wages. So it was equivalent if you worked for a day, the money that you would get for working for that day, 6,000 of those equals one of the talents. And so if we took a day's wage today, if we take minimum wage and figure 8 hours a day and what that would be, if we figured 30,000 days wages today, that's $3.6 million. That's a lot of cash. And so that's, if you imagine somebody coming and giving you $3.6 million and saying, "Here, take care of this. This is mine. I'm going to come back and get it," and then walks away and goes off. That's kind of a lot of responsibility. That's a lot of stuff that's going on. And so in ancient times, it was actually most of the business of masters were done by their servants. Most of their dealings in business and other things were actually handled by their servants, and that's why these servants were called to the master and given this property. There was an expectation that they were going to take this and go and do something else with it, conduct business with it, to actually bring an increase that the master could collect when he comes back. When the master goes off, each of these servants goes about their way. And in the story that we read in Jesus' parable, right here is a scene change. Right here, the master goes off, the servants going their way, and then Jesus cuts to the master coming back and calling the servants to him. But I kind of imagine, if you think about it like a movie, then this would be about the time when you see each of the servants working away and sweating away, and they're cut to a training montage with all sorts of running and business dealings and wheeling and dealing. And finally it cuts back and the master comes back. He calls all the servants to himself. These servants bring the money that they were given and their increase. And so the first servant comes back and he's doubled what he was given. The second servant comes back and same thing. He's doubled what he was given originally. Well, the third servant comes in, and this servant has not doubled. This servant just brings back what he was given originally. For each of these other two servants, the master looks at him and says, "You have dealt faithfully with what you've been given. I want you to enter into my joy." But with this third servant, he didn't do what was expected of him. He didn't deal faithfully with what was given to him. So the master actually calls him a wicked servant just because he went and hid the money that he had been given. He did not go and do business with it. And so he was cast out. He was not able to enter into the joy of his master with the other two servants. This third servant didn't do business as he was supposed to. He went and hid that money out of fear. He was afraid that he might lose it. He was afraid that he might do something wrong and lose that money, and that the master would be angry or upset and aggravated that this servant had lost the money that was entrusted to him. Turns out that this master was mad that this servant hadn't acted faithfully. There was that expectation that he didn't fulfill. He did not act in a faithful manner. So as our scripture tells us, the master allowed the two servants who had been faithful with what they were given to enter into their reward, while the third was called a wicked servant. So the point that we want to focus on here is, what did these men do to be called faithful? These servants knew what it meant to have property entrusted to them. They were given according to the ability that they had already shown. So the commentator Clifton Allen actually remarks on this parable, and he says, "It's not the amount that is important, but one's faithfulness to it. What is required of us is faithfulness." So what is faithfulness? We've been talking about Jesus teaching this story, and we've also been saying that it's important, but we should probably talk about what faithfulness and trustworthiness actually is. So trustworthiness and faithfulness are synonyms. They're very similar. They're very close to the same thing. It's essentially worthy of being trusted and worthy of having faith placed into you. It's pertaining to being trusted, or some other synonyms. It's faithful or trustworthy, dependable, reliable. It's essentially what we think of as doing what you say you're going to do, or doing what's expected of you. So what do each of these stories actually teach us and instruct us to do? Believe it or not, they are related. They do have a connection. We must give ourselves to the friendships in our lives. We have to give ourselves and give little pieces of us, and that's why building friendships can sometimes take work and be a labor. But in order for others to share their stories and their struggles with us, we must be trustworthy men. So to be friends with others, like I've said a couple times, is to give of ourselves. It's going to seem like a little more work, especially at first, because building friendships does require giving of yourself in some way. So while Paul points out his way of living and points out the way that he was living and giving of himself to his friends in 1 Thessalonians, he was actually living just like Jesus did. If you look at it and read through the Gospels and how Jesus walked and how he taught people and everything, Jesus was actually trusted and was followed by many people. During his ministry on the earth, he amassed a large following. It's one of the reasons why we're still talking about him, because there's so much that he brought. The Gospels show us why many people trusted him by showing us the way that he lived. So being faithful or trustworthy today is going to determine how close and how open others are going to be with you. As we show ourselves trustworthy, those around us are going to trust us more. When we are capable of being trusted, we will receive more trust from others. It will then lead to greater responsibility and will be a gradual positive spiral. When we are worthy of being trusted, others are going to put trust in us. And then we're going to have that opportunity to be trusted a little bit more. When we show ourselves worthy of that, then we're going to be trusted a little bit more. And it's going to gradually grow and be a upward spiral. So how do we apply these things? We've talked about all this. We've talked about how Jesus taught the story that it's important that we're faithful. And we talked about the importance of giving to ourselves, to our friends, and what that might look like. But how are we actually going to build these things in our lives? How are we actually going to do this? So a few ways to start showing that you are worthy of being trusted are a few simple ways. It's just be willing to help others. We want to be there. We want to be capable. We want to be able to help others. And then whenever we say that we're going to help, to actually be there to help. We want to be kind and compassionate. This is one thing from Jesus' teachings that I go back to quite a bit, is actually how Jesus so often was recorded as having compassion on others. How often it says through the Gospels that Jesus was filled with compassion when he saw the multitudes, when he saw those that were hurting and that needed healing, whenever he saw their need, he was filled with compassion and he did something to help that need. But another way is to actually follow through and do what you say that you're going to do. This is pretty simple. It seems pretty simple, but in actuality, it can be kind of difficult because we say a lot of things and we have a lot of good intentions. We a lot of times want to help a lot more than we are actually able. And when we go into these things, if we tell somebody that we are going to help or we're going to do something a certain way, in order to be seen as being faithful, in order to be seen as being trustworthy, we actually have to do the things that we say that we're going to do, and do them in the time that we say that we're going to do them in, and all those things that come into play. So another way that we show ourselves being trustworthy is respecting the boundaries of others and maintaining our own boundaries. Having our own boundaries is super important, but also realizing and learning how to recognize or how to listen and hear when others tell us of their boundaries, and then respecting those is going to show us as being trustworthy, as being faithful of a friendship. And then on top of all that, we want to build the skill of empathy. We really can build friendships when we want to connect with other people, when we show them that we are there to listen and to hear them out, to hear of their struggles, not to try to sympathize or to give them pity or anything, but to really truly be there and be there with them in those things that they're going through. We don't always have to have the right answer, or we don't have to have an answer to why they're feeling a certain way. We don't have to do those things, but a lot of times just being there with them, being able to sit across from a table at lunch or sit across and have coffee with somebody is so instrumental in just connecting with somebody and being a friend to them and being there with them as they experience life and as they try to find their way through life. And being empathetic and having empathy, having compassion for those that are around us are really good ways of starting to build trust with people and trying to show that we are faithful individuals, that we are faithful men and trustworthy men. So there must be also a measure of vulnerability in our relationships with one another. We have to give of ourselves, and sometimes that looks like being vulnerable with those that are around us. When we are vulnerable with others that we're trying to connect with, we actually create a sense of safety. And that's what a lot of this trustworthiness, faithfulness, and giving of ourselves is trying to build, and build a sense of safety with people. Because we want to share life, we want to do life together, but without vulnerability and without safety, without that trust, it's not really gonna happen. So opening up in appropriate amounts about your past, about your struggles, about all of your experiences in life will lead others to do the same. They're going to do the same and open up with you about their struggles and the things that they've experienced. And you might be able to glean from that, and they might be able to glean from your experiences as well. So how do we do that? How do we become more vulnerable with those that are around us? We must begin to realize that our experience is valuable to others, that it can be valuable to those that are around us, and that not everyone wants all of the unsolicited advice or may not want all of the nitty-gritty details right away. But when you make the people around you feel safe, they likely are going to be interested in your perspective and what you have to say. They're going to be interested in the things that you can offer because you've made yourself to be that trustworthy friend. You've shown yourself to be faithful of their time and their attention, and you've shown yourself to be worthy of their friendship. So I want to leave you today with a few questions to ponder. And so with these questions, I didn't mention this in the introduction, but with these questions, take a little time to ponder them, to think about them, to write them down and write out your responses and write out your answers. And If you feel okay, share them in the group chat and I'll share some of them as well. But I want you to think about one person that you trust. Think about that person, get them in your mind. Think of who they are. Think of their relationship with you. And think about, why do you trust that person? Kind of think a little bit deeper, and what are the things about that person that make you trust them, that have led to the trust that you have with them, that have led to your ability to trust them. So I appreciate your time today. I thank you for being with us. I thank you again for going through this Connect group and just being a part. I hope that these lessons are going to be fun. I hope that they're going to be impactful. I hope that there will be some stuff that you can glean from in each of these. And I look forward to seeing you. Look forward to seeing you at the activity this week. And I'll see you on the next video. Y'all have a blessed week.